in here? Just to
I
make
just
sure
did.
that.
I just
Okay.
did.
So, I mean, YouTube is a stretch goal. I mean, if it's sensitive, then it's fine. We just keep it in Google Drive. The important thing is we have materials for other people in the company and future members to learn and read on after this.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll keep quiet now. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So this is a test failure triage training session, which is going to be mostly a demo of running tests and reproducing errors by running GDK locally and also by running Docker. So I'm going to share my screen. And I want this one. Right. So I've shared this document. These notes are going to be added, well, all the important notes are going to be added to this guidelines document here. So this is the debugging failing tests document that we've got up on the handbook. And this training session assumes that you're familiar with this process, so you can have a read of it. Basically, the steps are to create an issue, quarantine a test, and then investigate the failure. So I'm assuming that you're familiar with the pipelines, familiar with the process of creating an issue, creating an MR to quarantine a test. And now we're getting to the point of investigating the failure so that we can add some notes to the failure log for anybody who's going to be fixing it, or even move on to fixing it yourself. So the document here, I had a link to an issue, an existing issue. This is one that's still quarantined. So this is a staging issue, and in this case, it failed because it was unable to find this selector, QA admin area link, while trying to use the menu to go to the admin area. Now, this test I was familiar with, so it was pretty straightforward. The troubleshooting was pretty straightforward. I knew that in staging, we don't have admin access, and so this isn't going to work. But trying to reproduce it locally, I found another problem. So there's actually another error in this test, and in this case, the error that I get when I ran it locally was that the branch name master already exists. So I'm going to try to reproduce that using GDK. So I'm going to switch over to my terminal, and I'm just going to restart GDK because it's pretty straightforward, so I'll demo it. Okay, so that's just killed GDK. I'm in the GDK CE folder, you can see there. And if I just
would you mind zooming your zooming the text a little bit? Maybe just like one zoom.
How do I do that?
Command plus, I think, should do it.
Command plus. Command plus, Control plus.
No,
Window plus. No, let's try
no,
this.
okay, it's fine. It's not terribly small. I'm just old.
What if I share my other screen? I can move to my other screen where the resolution is a bit lower.
I wouldn't worry about it. Don't interrupt your flow. It's totally fine. It's visible.
Okay, cool. So GDK run, let that start up, and then I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to bring up the test. So the test was this one, push over HTTP file size spec. So I've got that open here. And I've just uncommented the quarantine meta tag there because I found another bug. And so it wouldn't run while it was quarantined. So this just allows me to run the test. And I've got a launch config set up here. Oh, let me go up to the top. Come back. Got a launch config set up here that uses the Chrome headless 0 environment variable and QA debug 1. So Chrome headless 1, that turns off headless, allows me to see what's going on. QA debug set to 1, that writes logs, as you can see in the bottom here. And then the arguments here. So this is running the bin QA command. So it's like running that command from the terminal. If you're going to do it from the command line, it would look like that. Bin QA test instance all. There's the URL. So that's the my IP address and the port that I've got GDK running on. And this is the file that I'm going to run. So I'm running just one specific test. Here in the command line, you can see I had 31 there. I'm going to do that here again. So I'm just running one test on one specific line. And on the command line down here, you can see I've got a tag and quarantine. So if it was working properly and I just wanted to focus on this one test because it was quarantined before, I could add that tag to let it run the quarantine tag, but I disabled that, so it doesn't matter for this example. So anyway, I'm going to execute that, and that should run the test. And I'll just drag over the window, again, my second monitor. So yeah, drag that over. Now you should be able to see it. Let me know if you can't. At the moment, it's loaded the list of projects. Good, and it should add just going to open the console. So that's going to hide for a second, and we're back. So it's adding a personal access token, and you can see in the background the logs of it pushing the files. So it's cloned the project, it's pushed a README file, and now it's going to actually start the test. Going to the admin area. So this is what failed on staging because there's no admin area icon. That's working now, and we should save the changes. So it's just checked that the changes have been saved. So I cheated before and ran the test and then figured out what was wrong. And I haven't reverted that change, so it actually worked. So let's stop that. I'm going to undo the changes that I made. Not in the spec helper, it's over in push. Yeah, this was the one branch. No, that one was fine. That'll do. Yeah. Okay. So let's try that again. So that was a bit of a preview of the fix, but I'll go over that again in a second. So we're going to add the access token again, and I can show you how to skip this step in a second, because when you're testing locally, you don't need to do this every time. So if you're reusing the same GDK instance, you can reuse the same access token. Okay, so we have the project. I'm going to change the file size limit again. Save the change and then reload. Verify the change. And then try to push file. Okay, now we have an error. And it's running the after. Yeah, it's running the after block. There's an after block here that's going to undo the file size change. And that's there because there's two tests. So we want to revert the change that the first one made before running the second test. But anyway, so this is the failure that we were seeing in the logs. Same one here, a branch named master already exists. Now, if you were triaging and you just wanted to verify that the failure is reproducible, this is far enough. You could say that, yes, you've reliably reproduced the failure. That would be enough to provide some information that, yeah, this is definitely a failure. But it would be good to go a bit further and determine, if possible, if this is a failure with the test or if there's something wrong with GitLab itself. Now, in this case, we can go back up to the command that was issued, and we can see that it's issuing a checkout to create a branch called master. And earlier in the test, it's already checked out master and created the branch successfully. So this isn't valid logic. We know that you can't create the branch that's already been created. So there's something wrong with the test there. And if you're looking into it yourself, you'd need to do a bit of troubleshooting, step through, try and reproduce, identify where things have gone wrong. We won't go through all of that, but yeah, to cut to the solution, whatever change was made, change the logic so that we need to tell this test now not to create a new branch. So this is a failure with the test. It's a pretty easy fix. I haven't submitted it yet, but I will now. And if you were doing the triage yourself, you've got to this point. If you were able to figure out pretty quickly that, okay, here's a fix for the test, just submit it, and then you're done. Don't need to worry about, anybody else having to follow up on it. So let's assume we haven't done that. And let's assume that we weren't able to reproduce the failure using GDK. So the next step that we had in the document was to have a look at running it in Docker. So GDK is a different GitLab environment than is in the test, that runs using CI. We use Docker containers in CI based on the Omnibus GitLab image. So that's what we can do locally as well. We can run the Docker container, and this is the command that will run it. Docker run publish port 80 on the container, map it to port 80 on the host, naming the container net test, because by default, the Docker container that runs GitLab and the Docker container that runs the tests, there'll be two tests, two containers. We want them to be communicating on the same network. It's easier to have it as a separate network. Hostname, localhost, and there's a name of the container. That takes a while to start up, so I'll just show you one that I prepared earlier. So when you run it, it takes a while to start up, but after a while you'll see the production logs being output here on a loop. And then if I go over to localhost, I should see that it's up and running. So if I switch back to the test, to Visual Studio, and I change the host that I'm running the test against, I can just run the same test from the same environment, but now bring over the browser, and now it's running the same test, but this time it's running it against the Docker container. And this is the nightly image, so it doesn't have my changes, so it should fail in the same way as was in the logs. Let's see. Nope, it's calling me a liar. Interesting. Oh, of course. No, because this is running the GitLab image, and we haven't actually changed any code in the GitLab image. It's the test code that I fixed. So yeah, silly me. Run that again without the fix. And it's interesting that this Docker image seems to be running faster than my GDK, which is kind of nice. And there's a failure. And now it's cleaning up. All right, and so we see the same error. Okay. And another option, suppose that that didn't allow you to reproduce the failure. The final option is perhaps there's something about the communication between two Docker images that CI uses. So maybe something goes wrong when you also run the tests inside a Docker container. So we can do that by running the same command as run in the actual CI itself. So the CI jobs use GitLab QA, and they'll run, for example, test instance image against the CE image. And now we want to run this specific test. And so that is going to spin up the nightly image again, run the Docker container. This is going to take a while, but then after it runs the GitLab image in Docker, it will run the tests. And we can come back to this and see what the output is. It's going to run for a while. I also mentioned earlier that you can set the personal access token. So you can do that using GitLab QA access token. And if you set up a token manually, or alternatively, there's now one that's inbuilt. Let's see if I can find the source for it. No, that's not in there. In the fixtures for the application, DB, no. DB fixtures, development, admin, no. Personal access token, there we go. So the development seed adds a personal access token. That's the one there. So if you configure an environment variable that includes that access token, if you run the tests, it shouldn't need to create an access token. So just skip that first step. So we'll see if that works. No, something has gone wrong. I think my GDK might be out of date. We'll see what the error is. In the meantime, I'll check on the Docker run. So here it shows that it's started GitLab in a Docker container and was waiting for it to become responsive. And now it's just issued another Docker run command to start the QA container image and run test instance against the Docker container address, running that test that we told it to, just that test that we told it to. So while we're waiting for that to finish, let's go back here and see why. Okay, so yeah, we're going to need to investigate that. So this should work. Something is going wrong here. I think the seed was just added. It's possible that my GDK is out of date. Yeah, that's a separate issue anyway, though. I'll take that offline. Here is the output from running GitLab QA. And here again, we can see that it shows the same output. So those are the three first line options that you would take when troubleshooting. One of these should allow you to reproduce the error, and hopefully some combination of them leading back to GDK will allow you to identify where things are going wrong and either fix a problem or add some notes to the issue for somebody else to follow up on. So I think that wraps up the demo. Is there anything, any questions or anything you'd like to see?
In the situation where you were able to find the fix, you would still have quarantined it, and your fix would just include the fix plus unquarantining it. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And if it was a flaky test, then ideally you wouldn't unquarantine it when you submitted the fix. Ideally submit the change, leave it in quarantine for a few runs, say 5, make sure it passes every time, and then submit another merge request to unquarantine it. But in this case, it failed all the time, so we could unquarantine it immediately. And that's not what I'll do, though, because there's a separate issue. But if it was just this one issue with trying to recreate the master branch, then that's what I would do.
And then if you're not able to figure out the issue, who does it might be in the other document that you have open. Who does it get assigned to? Do you just throw it, like post it in the group Slack for whatever group it affects, or how would you move forward then?
Yeah. So if I couldn't reproduce it, then I would probably open it up to the quality team as well as whichever team the feature is relevant to, so the create team, for example. Because if it is a problem with the software, and I'm not confident that it's not, I'd want somebody to know and look into it. If I'm confident it's the test, but for whatever reason I can't reproduce it, then I would just try to get the quality team involved.
And if you can quarantine it but you can't fix it, you would just post it to create or whoever, so that they can try to address it and unquarantine it?
Yeah, so if it's quarantined, so I think we can see here that it's just assigned to quality. If it's the test, that's enough. If it's not the test, then I'd also assign it to the create team, or whichever team it would be. In this case, it is the create team. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, as part of their flow, will they just see this and take it on, or do you also have to flag it to someone, or how will this get visibility then?
Yeah, I think we did say in there to flag it to someone specific. I think that would be, the appropriate thing to do. What does it actually say here? Refer to the front end or back end engineering manager of the concerned team by mentioning in the issue comments. Yeah.
Okay.
I think. Yeah. I think if you do know that somebody was working on a particular feature, and you can identify that as the cause. For example, if you've been working with a team and you know that some merge request just went in recently, then you could go directly to an engineer, but otherwise to the relevant manager for the relevant team.
So we have the quality flaky tests label. What do we constitute as a flaky test? I just realized, because Mark, when you said if you think it's a flaky test, let's not move it out of quarantine yet until it's proven stable. And the configure team, my smoke test that I had actually assigned to you, was failing because of a specific reason. It wasn't flaky, it was just failing. So do we treat just regular failures as a flaky test?
No. And it can be difficult if we just see one report, but I'm pretty sure now the pipelines are set up to retry. So RSpec will retry each test 3 times and then fail. So you can look through the logs and see if it has retried. And if it's retried and failed each time, then we know it's not flaky. If you look through and see that it actually passed in one of the attempts, or if it passed in one of the attempts, then it's going to pass. So I guess you need to do some forensic analysis of previous logs to see whether or not.
I can't remember. Do we have a label for just failing tests then? It probably wouldn't be broken master necessarily. I don't know.
Yeah, we have a flaky test, quality flaky tests label. Yeah,
but what we just mentioned, what you just described, a flaky test is one that's, flaky, not necessarily just failing 100% of the time. So do we have, like I said, my example, my failing smoke test, do we assign a specific label to it other than flaky test? Because we know it's failing, we quarantine, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think I understand. It would be bug and P1 and S1 if it's failing in master. So in the guidelines, there's the steps for creating an issue, and it suggests they're adding quality, bug, and S1 labels, and then also P1 or P2, depending on whether it's going to be scheduled for the current milestone or the next milestone.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and there's more links there about the priorities. Yeah, so it would be bug as well as the P1 or S1, P1 and S1 labels.
Gotcha.
And just to clarify, we're talking about a broken test, not a problem with GitLab.
That's right. Yeah. Those labels would be applied to the issue about the broken test. Yeah. If it's a problem with GitLab, there'd be a separate issue for that as well.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little hairy because I think, I don't know. It's a bigger discussion, but maybe like instead of quality : flaky tests, it'll be quality : broken test or failing test. But I mean that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah. There are all the master labels that can be applied to the issue about the debugging GitLab itself. Yeah.
I think if it has the label quality and a bug, it implies that there's a bug in our tests or test harness. I think that's enough for now, unless we want to spin up another label.
I'll see if I can find that in any of our documentation, because just having the bug tag by itself could be a little misleading.
I know. We're in, I hate to say this, but there's a term in product management that says it's label hell. Take it at face value, but it can be overwhelming. And like quality bug, quality : bug is the same as quality and a bug. If you can think of a better name, feel free to propose it. But I understand it. It's not flaky. It's a defect in our test harness.
Yeah, it would make sense with quality and like a bug label. Yeah, that's very, very appropriate.
Yeah, so I think that wraps up the demo, and that's the main steps for triaging and troubleshooting. So I think we can wrap that up unless you have any other questions or anything else you want to see.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that this is a really fantastic training, so thank you so much, Mark.
No worries.
Yes, it was very excellent. Thanks, Mark. Even better job than the first one.
Yeah.
A couple questions. You know what? I forgot the second one. But the launch configuration that you had, any good tips on getting that set up? Oh, the other comment was thank you for the tip on the access token.
No worries. Tips for the launch config? No, I just Googled the documentation for VS Code launch config to figure out all the bits that are needed. I do have a snippet that I think I can make public. I'm just going to make sure I don't have any secrets in there. Yeah, so I'll share my screen again.
While you're doing that, Dan, have you done anything like that for RubyBind?
Yeah, I was actually just about to take a picture for you and upload it somewhere.
Cool.
Yeah, so I have a launch config here. I'll make it public. And that's just a basic, but essentially it's adding the environment variables and whatever arguments and changing it. And there's this handy little file command there, which means that if you select a file in Visual Studio Code, it will substitute the path to that file and run that specific test, which can be handy.
Nice.
So I actually have a few different. This is the wrong Studio Code, CE. So I have a few different configurations set up. If I want to run specific tests, if I want to run smoke tests, or if I want to run tests in a certain group, or I want to run test against staging, I have a few different configurations set up so that I can quickly do any of those. But current file is the one that I mostly use.
Very nice.
I have a quick question here. Just because I noticed the headless flag, are we debugging with headless or without headless most of the time? I assume you're running full head, right, with debugging?
Yeah, yeah. I pretty much always have that to disable headless. Yeah,
okay.
If I'm going to be doing it locally. And then sometimes I might run all of the tests headless in the background while I'm working on something else, just to make sure if I make a bunch of changes and want to make sure I haven't broken anything else, I'll just run them all and I'll run them headless so it doesn't get in the way.
Okay. Have we noticed any flakiness specifically to headless? And I think this came up with a discussion with Dan and me a while back, where should we just run QA full head because that's what our users are using? Because I assume right now we're running headless, correct, everywhere?
You mean in CI?
Yeah, in CI.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think so. I only recall one instance where there was a problem that was related to running headless. And I think it was actually just that a developer ran in an environment where their desktop resolution was too low. And so they ran into an error there, and it wasn't reproduced during CI because there was more virtual space in the headless CI environment. But other than that, I haven't come across any issues here.
I see. Okay.
I think that's something we'll get covered in our visual regression once we get that moving.
Yeah. I was about to say, until we have our own internal grid, I think once we have that, I would like to actually turn on full head, because that's probably a better representation of what our users are using. I mean, specs and mocking can be headless. We can pick and choose, but I would like to cover like a full head. I'm not sure even that's
people do not use headless browsers on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's certainly better if we do have that full coverage.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, food for thought. Obviously not something I'm asking anybody to take on right now. Okay, thank you.
Got my blood boiling a little bit because that's a hot topic for me.
Yeah, and since we're running headless all the time anyway, we're not revealing whatever problems there could potentially be that we're not seeing. So yeah, it certainly doesn't mean that there aren't problems.
I found it interesting that your Docker was running faster than your GTK.
Yeah. And I blew away my GTK database fairly recently as well. So I don't know what that's about. Webpack, perhaps.
I'm going to have to experiment with that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at just over 3 minutes left. So that was perfect timing to get everything done. That's you get 2 gold stars, Mark.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for coming along and thanks for your questions. Yeah, I hope it's been helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Great work, guys and girls. Bye.